Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Hi there. I am so incredibly excited to be having this conversation with my friend Katie Gall. Katie is a performer. She is a voice teacher, and she is also a life coach for creatives. And Katie and I have been having some really interesting conversations about the interface between being highly sensitive and empathic and having the diagnosis of ADHD. Katie, I am so thrilled to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I love talking ADHD.
I am so glad you love talking about ADHD because one of the things I've been noticing is, like, for one thing, at least in my world, there are so many people who are coming forward with their diagnosis of ADHD. And many, many people who are empaths who are talking about the fact that they are also diagnosed with ADHD. And I mean, I come from a long line of people with ADHD and sensory processing issues, and hands up, I definitely fit that category. Although in my family, the way I describe it is like, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed queen is like sovereign. And I was the one with kind of one eye compared to some of the other family members. So I kind of like slipped under the radar because I was more high functioning than other family members. Yeah. So it's only been in adulthood and reading things and going, oh my God, ding, ding. I fit I can tick almost all the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about it to me is that the way back when I was diagnosed, basically the way that you looked at a diagnosis, that's back when we had both ADD and ADHD. Everything was sort of based on how men presented with ADHD, and the way that women and girls present with ADHD tends to be way quieter. It's different. It's not the running around the room thing. It's the zoning out when I'm not interested in something thing. And so I think back in the day, I was officially diagnosed as ADD, but now what I'm called is ADHD inattentive type. So it's not that, you probably as a young person, you probably weren't running around the house like unable to stop your body from moving. You were probably just like paying attention to something more interesting when whatever was happening wasn't.
Or being so maxed out that I was just shut down.
Yes.
That I had been overstimulated with way too much information. And it was like my brain would just kind of go on freeze mode. And I would just be like, what? Deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that, we know now about ADHD and, just for your audience out there, I am not a medical professional. This is mostly experiential and from talking to other people with ADHD. But your zone of awareness when you have ADHD is way wider than neurotypical brains. You're sort of taking in all information all the time, and you can't really prioritize what is important or not. And so by the end of the day, I mean, if you know the spoons analogy, you've got you're in negative spoons.
Exactly.
By the end of the day.
Exactly. Maybe by midday, you're actually in negative spoons.
Absolutely.
Well, and thinking about sort of like that idea of we're taking in all the information, add being highly sensitive and empathic on top of it, not only are you taking in all the information on the physical level, but you're also taking in all the information on the energetic and emotional level as well. So we're just getting bombarded with information nonstop every day.
Yeah. And when you're not able to differentiate between energetically what is yours and what is someone else's, one of the things that we, as we were speaking about earlier, one of the things that comes along with ADHD is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And so when you can't differentiate energetically between what is someone else's and what is yours, oftentimes people with ADHD who are highly empathic can walk into a room and immediately feel like I'm not supposed to be here. This is not my space. And a lot of that, I think, personally has to do with whatever's been going on in the energy of that room.
Absolutely.
And it's not necessarily you don't belong there. It's something has happened and I'm picking up on it and I can't shut it down. Well,
and I've had the experience a couple times that has been really amazing where I've been completely fine and I've gone to events where people are really looking at their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, like about, I don't know, anywhere, depending on the length of the event, it might be anywhere between like a couple hours to like a day into it. All of a sudden, I'm having all this insecurity. I'm having all of these feelings of like, I'm wrong. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. I'm going to go eat worms. And this is not my natural state at this point. There was a time where that would have been true, where I would have gone into a place and I would have been like, nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. I'm going to go eat worms. But now that's not the way I tend to operate. So it's a little bit like, wow, where is this coming from? And it took a little while for me to realize that a lot of times, especially when you're in a room full of other highly sensitive, empathic, transformational entrepreneurs, healers, light workers, creatives, that you're going to have people who are at various levels of the emotional sort of recovery spectrum and people who are just beginning, especially to look at their stuff, to look at their growth and their development, are going to be really experiencing a lot of that rejection, dysphoria, and just all of that. And as empaths, we become this tape loop, which then unfortunately amplifies it. So you get this room of people who are all just kind of like feeling out of sorts. But that was a really powerful thing when I started to go, you know what? Think there's something about these people who are not comfortable in their own skin that I'm really picking up on. And as an empath, what I've realized is that the challenge about being an empath as opposed to an intuitive or a psychic is that empaths experience the data and the information coming into us through the filter of our own felt experience. Whereas psychics and intuitives kind of sense it, but they're like, this is not me.
Yeah.
And empaths, on the other hand, we process it as if it is our own.
Yeah.
So woohoo!
Yay. Love that. Yeah. Well, and I think the other piece, the H in ADHD is hyper, basically, right?
Yes.
It's hyper focusing, it's being hyper aware. And so one of the other things that can happen is once you have that feeling of I'm in the wrong place, I'm the wrong person, something is wrong with me, it means that you start going down this rabbit hole of like, what did I do wrong? And you start finding evidence for all of these things that still aren't yours. Yeah. But you can find it if you look hard enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think about something like, I remember a quote from Madonna from years and years and years ago, where she basically said, I could get hundreds, thousands of positive fan letters and positive energy and positive information coming to me. One nasty comment and I'm just wrecked. I'm devastated.
Yep.
And I think that I've absolutely seen this within myself and absolutely seen it in a number of other creatives and, light workers and highly sensitive, like empathic entrepreneurs, where it's like, all it takes is just that one criticism and we are just crumbling.
Yeah. And I will say, there was a time back in the day where that was very true for me. And even now, I'll say I feel it when something like that happens. And, being on social media all the time, I have plenty of people who are giving me positive feedback. Being a performer, I have plenty of people who are giving me positive feedback. And then that one troll comes along. Yeah. And it is enough to potentially ruin my day if I hadn't already done so much work to know that, that's what that emotional response is about. And it's fine to feel it, but we need to not live there because that's not reality.
It's not reality. But it does take being aware of this. And I mean, it was revelatory for me when I was like, oh my God, that's really a thing. And, Because I think because as a creative and because as sort of a magical woo person, I'm around a lot of other people who are neurodivergent, that I have, that many of us struggle with this. So I just kind of assumed that everybody was hypercritical of themselves. Everybody went through this thing where they'd implode if they got the slightest bit of criticism. And I mean, I remember being a little kid and just noticing like certain kids could just shake it off, or like a parent would correct them or a teacher would correct them, or somebody would just be like, hey, kid, don't do that. And it was like, they just really give zero F's about it. Like they were like, I don't care. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do. Whereas for me, I was so invested in being a good girl and in like, and not making a mistake, that if somebody if somebody was like, hey, if like I got a correction, I could just implode from that correction.
With things like that followed me into my adult life. And honestly, into my marriage. My husband grew up in a family that just like communicated really well, I guess. And like, if there was a problem, they stated it. Maybe they fought about it because he had 2 other brothers. But it was dealt with and everybody moved on and loved each other and there wasn't a problem, right?
Right.
My experience of him doing that to me, where it wasn't necessarily equaling a fight, but he would say like, hey, can you do this thing differently? Was immediate defenses
Instant.
Like, no, I'm not in the wrong because da 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 da. And it was like, because it felt like a rejection. It felt like, oh my God, if I don't do the dishes properly, we're going to get divorced.
Yes.
And it took me a really long time to realize, and I wouldn't ask him to do things because I didn't want to put that feeling on him, not really knowing that he didn't feel that.
No, not at all.
To him, it was just, oh yeah, I can do this differently with the dishes.
Yeah, completely.
It's not an issue.
And what I noticed for myself is that I'm super sensitive to tone. And my husband has a radio voice. He was literally working in radio for many years before he became a psychotherapist. And he has a gorgeous radio voice, but it's very, very deep. And when he sometimes will say things to me, I experience it as a criticism, and it's just his tone of voice. And what I had to learn to do with him was I had to learn how to say, I'm imagining that you're angry with me. Is that true?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I had to get a reality check because I was constantly experiencing even the slightest bit of like, no, do it that way, as like, just my little girl would just lose it. So I started to learn how to basically be like, I also learned how to say, I'm really sensitive right now. Could you please adjust your tone?
Yeah.
Because he also doesn't really have total awareness of how his tone lands. He's an Aries with a very fiery, like he delivers in a very fiery way. And so, I've asked him to modulate, like to be like, I need you to like dial it down a little bit. That emotional intensity about dishes is really can't handle it. But I also learned this piece of, so I learned to ask for him to just kind of like deliver in a slightly calmer way. But I also had to learn how to say, I'm imagining you're angry with me.
I love that actually, because it puts it into like the realm of this might not be true.
This might not be true.
It's possible that this is not a real thing, and so it might just be my imagination.
It might just be your imagination. We're coming up on, we will have been married for 21 years at this point. And I will say that for the most part, the evidence is that when I'm imagining, it's not true. Like, and with him in particular, if I've done something that really pisses him off, he lets me know. Like, he's like, I'm pissed. Like, that was fucked up. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. You have good communication between the two of you overall. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it is really this thing that we create in our own brains. Our brains are always looking for the risk. They're always looking for the negative because that's how our brains keep us safe.
And we're looking for the patterns.
And we're looking
not
for the
just
patterns,
looking for the simple triage pattern. We're looking for the large patterns so that we can understand the entire picture.
Will the dishes always make my husband say ... Right. Will and I think taking that a step further as someone ADHD and an empath, will I always be in trouble for how I do the dishes? Is this something that I'm never going to be able to do
I'm never going to
right?
be able to do it the right way.
I'm never going to be able to do it right. You know, we take it that one step further. And so I like just the verbiage of imagine.
Yeah.
I imagine.
I'm imagining that you're really angry with me. I highly recommend it. It's really helpful. I will say, though, that this only works with people who are emotionally healthy and not gaslighters. Because if you're around a narcissist who's gaslighting you all the time, if you say that, they're just going to basically use it to mess with your head.
Absolutely.
So it needs to be a relationship where there is mutual trust and respect and emotional health in terms of communication. I want to roll back to something that you were saying. You were talking about your family not offering criticism or being silent about it. And I was thinking about how so often, you know, all of these spectrum things, all of the neurodiversity, I think tends to run in families. And a lot of times it's like, I think we are at a generation where it's getting more and more acute now than it was. But like my father had ADHD and I have I've got other family members with ADHD and I've got nephews with ADHD, like it runs in my family. But there's a lot of emotional charge around this diagnosis. There's a lot of stigma around this diagnosis. There's a lot of shame around this diagnosis. But I wonder sometimes if part of it too, like if your family is not communicating this, you know, like just being direct, some of it is if you've got other people with ADHD, they're not as inclined to offer a correction or be direct about something because they know how painful it is. Yeah. So there's sort of almost like this, I don't know, enabling going on.
Yeah. That's interesting. You know, I did grow up with other people with ADHD in my family, but I think I'm actually not sure about this. I might be the only one that has an official diagnosis, or at least the only one that I know of that has an official diagnosis. But on top of that, my family growing up, we just weren't very good at communicating problems generally. Yeah. And, you know, part of that was, you know, just because of how my parents grew up, you didn't air dirty laundry. Right. Part of that was that when I became a teenager, I was a bitch. And I became pretty rebellious at times. And I think there was a lot of sort of feeding back and forth because you had the hormones of me being a teenager. You had the rejection sensitivity dysphoria on multiple planes going on. And we just hadn't practiced communicating as well. And now actually we're much better at it overall. Yeah. But a lot of that is because certain members of the family, including myself, sort of forced it.
Well, and you probably learned tools for communicating. Yes. You know, the idea that we know how to communicate is so unfair. Yeah. You know, there's so many things that, like, I don't know, like we're supposed to just know how to rear children. We're supposed to just know how to love somebody. We're supposed to just know how to have sex. We're supposed to know how to communicate. Like there's all these things that we're supposedly supposed to know how to do. And there's no, you know, and the thing is that it's not something that we just know how to do. Yeah. We need to learn. And there are very specific communication tools that we can develop and learn. Like, for example, mirroring is an incredibly powerful and effective communication tool that I spent a lot of time learning when I was in graduate school and seminary. Yeah. And at first it feels really clunky and really awkward. And, you know, just to share with the audience, mirroring is when basically somebody says something and what you do is you reflect back exactly what you hear and you confirm it. So like if Katie was just saying, you know, I came from a family that didn't really know how to communicate, I would be like, so you came from a family that didn't really know how to communicate. Am I getting that right? Is that accurate? And you would then say yes. Or you would say, well, actually not quite that. And the thing about that technique is that it allows us, and especially I think for people with ADHD, this is a technique that actually allows us to listen and parse out the information and slow down the rate at which we are processing information.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's something that I use with my clients all the time, my life coaching clients. And one of the things that I think is really cool about that tool is that just the act of hearing your own words said back to you helps the person, not the listener, but the speaker, clarify further for themselves what they actually are feeling or what they're actually meaning to convey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And with EFT, interestingly, you know, the whole like good EFT is about picking up on the precise exact language of the person who is saying it. And what I've had the experience of doing is like, I will take somebody's exact words and then as they're tapping, they'll be like, well, actually, it's a little bit different than that. And there is something so powerful about that. Whereas I will say some of the EFT out in the world where you've got people who are just basically manufacturing scripts and like saying things. One of the reasons why, if you've tried like tapping along with somebody on YouTube and or following a written script and it's not working for you is because it's not your language. It's not you. And it's like, this is the thing about EFT. Good EFT is about dialing in precisely to your own stuff. But, you know, that and the idea of reflecting what we are saying, what we are feeling is so incredibly powerful, but it is a learned skill for sure.
It is. And I want to circle back for a second because one of the things that you mentioned earlier was that there was sort of a stigma around your ADHD or lack of diagnosis.
Lack of diagnosis. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to communication, you know, you said we aren't taught how to do it. And the ways that we do at least for me, the ways that I have been taught how to do it are because something is quote unquote wrong with me and I need to learn it, meaning I need to go to a therapist or I need to learn techniques because I'm ADHD. And so just this idea of being an effective communicator, like, is compounded with this shame and stigma of, oh, there's something wrong with me already. And really, no. Nobody's taught to communicate effectively for the most part.
Nobody is taught. And if anything, what I actually think is like people like you and I, where the system, the stuff all of our emotions, pretend that everything is fine, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, that all of that is that we are the outliers who are like, this is not working.
Yeah.
And we cannot function within that system. What if it's not that we're the broken ones? What if it's that we are actually the healthier ones who are responding or rebelling against a broken system?
Yep.
And we're actually the ones who are bringing solutions into our family systems and saying, this ain't working. We need to do this thing differently. And I think what's happening is as we've got these generations of people and more people coming out, like discovering that they're highly sensitive, empathic, more and more people discovering that they have ADHD. I think what's happening is that we're hitting critical mass in terms of the old systems are just not working.
Yeah.
That denial, compression, and especially white people, like God bless white people, and especially like, WASPs and from a Puritan Protestant upbringing, that there is just like, we have learned how to nurse resentments with silent treatment and just that simmering rage that, as a highly sensitive child, it just can feel like absolutely awful.
Yeah. I actually have an entire poem that I wrote at one point about my rage monster that just lives inside me.
Inside you.
And every once in a while, just like bursts out in total anger. Come to learn that so much of that rage monster had to do with my ADHD and how I felt I was supposed to be in the world, quote unquote, versus how I am actually able to happily be in the world. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, and I grew up, my mom with especially like sort of Irish Catholic upbringing, my mother was the master of silent treatment. And you knew if you knew that you had really crossed a line, if she was not talking to you.
That's me.
And I've only had one time in my entire life where I was so utterly like ripshit about something where I basically gave a couple of people silent treatment for like a couple of weeks. Like I just would not speak to them.
Yeah.
But it was, and it was like, they knew like they had fucked up because, because I mean, silent treatment is a really interesting thing, but on the other side of it, it is so messed up because it's kind of like, okay, you're pissed and I'm just supposed to extrapolate from the fact that you're not talking to me, that there's something wrong here.
Yes. Though, what just came to me is that it's also, it is a punishment in the sense that it's a form of ostracization.
Yes.
Which is terrifying to us as tribal people.
Yes.
Yes. As animals that like belong in a clan, in a group, in a community. Ostracization is one of the scariest things.
It is. Well, and this brings us to this amazing thing, which is that when I was in graduate school, I learned this amazing factoid, which is that it is actually substantially more harmful to be disconfirmed, which means to be just ignored, invalidated, and treated as if you do not exist. You're disconfirmed. It is actually more harmful to the human psyche to be disconfirmed than to get negative attention. So one of the things that happens for a lot of children, if they're in dysfunctional family systems and they're not getting positive attention, they will act out to get negative attention because it's like more life affirming to get the crap kicked out of you than it is to be left alone and neglected and abandoned.
Yeah.
And so if you start thinking about this, like there are politicians who shall remain nameless where you can see their 5-year-old out there acting out constantly because we know their history with their father and their mother, but especially their father, was an absolute, like, actually, it's really interesting if you start looking at some of the dictators and some of the fascists that are rising up. If you look at their childhood stories and if you look at the neglect that they experienced as kids, it's sort of like they are in a perpetual loop of trauma where they learned that they would get attention by acting out. And 60 years later, they're still pulling this crap.
Yeah.
Because, repetition compulsion, but also if we do not heal our trauma, we carry it everywhere. We bleed out on all things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It affects absolutely everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Yeah. So I want to go back to something just because this was a piece that you were talking about that like you just gave me a piece of information and I just got another puzzle piece, which was the idea that ordinary, quote, muggles or whatever we want to, neurotypical people, they have a capacity to parse out information and see the world through like they can prioritize,
they can prioritize.
And they see things. And the very first time I realized I was different in the way that I perceived things was that I was at a friend's house and we had been partying and hanging out. And we were sort of all kind of like, winding down for the evening. And so the TV was on in the living room and we were watching Gamera, and I'm sitting in the living room and I am watching the television and I'm watching them watching the television. I am aware of the sound of the bubbler in the fish tank next to me. I'm aware of the colors in the fish tank next to me. I'm seeing the fish in the fish tank. I'm aware of their I'm aware of the sensation of the seat underneath me. I'm aware of the lights around me. I'm aware of my own emotional response to everything and how I'm feeling really sort of sideways and a little bit out of sorts and off.
Yep.
I'm aware of the fact that the floor is not level. And so I'm feeling kind of like a little bit like discombobulated from that. I'm aware of like the paneling in the walls, like everything. I'm just taking it all in. And I look over at them and they are entirely in tunnel vision, focusing on the TV. And they're laughing at the TV, laughing at this ridiculous, Japanese dubbed movie. And that's all they are focusing on. And I make I think I made some comment at the time and they just were kind of like, huh, what? It just did not even register. And that for me was the moment that I went, oh, I am taking in where they're taking in 10%, I'm taking in 95%.
That's so interesting to me because I absolutely also had that experience, but I never, to me, it was just, oh, damn it, I can't pay attention again. It wasn't like I was not aware that I was taking in everything. Mm-hmm. I was just aware that I couldn't focus on the thing that I was supposed to be focusing on.
Well, and what's interesting is you, as a teenager, got the, quote, diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And so you had that label. I, on the other hand, came from a family because there was so much stigma about actually owning our ADHD mm-hmm. diagnosis. Nobody got diagnosed with it. My father, we knew, had it, mm-hmm. but I don't even know. I mean, he was born in the 1930s. So it's not like he was diagnosed with it as a kid. People weren't even talking about it at that point. They just called him a spaz, which was a total insult.
Yeah.
But
still is.
But yeah, it still is. Obviously, it's even more of an insult now. Yeah. It's very politically incorrect to say that. So to anybody who hears me say that, I am no offense meant.
Yep.
It's just what he was called.
Yeah.
But, it was really okay to have a learning disability in my family. Dyslexia was kind of like the moniker that everybody could wear with pride. Like, okay, I've got the dyslexia. I'm wearing the dyslexia crown. I've got the dyslexia diagnosis and I can acknowledge that. And I actually didn't even know this until I was an adult. But at one point, I think like maybe 10, 15 years ago, my mom, I think it was one of my nephews got a diagnosis of nonverbal learning disability. And my mom was like, oh, yeah, you had that too. And I was like, really? You never bothered to tell me about this?
Yep.
And, again, what's so fascinating is, it's that whole thing of like the way a male responds to or manifests that particular disability versus the way a female does.
Yeah.
Totally different. But in our family, ADHD was sort of this thing where it's like everybody knows that everybody has it, but nobody will admit to it.
Yeah.
So in a way, I didn't necessarily get the tape loops or, as in EFT, the writings on the wall mm-hmm. that you got mm-hmm. about you can't focus, you can't pay attention. I mean, I was constantly being told that I was a flake. I was constantly being told that I was disorganized. Mm-hmm. I was constantly being told like, oh, if only you could like, just, like Nikki and I were talking about this or actually, I don't know if it was Nikki or anyway, I was having a conversation with either Chris or Nikki just recently about the whole sort of like, oh, but she has so much potential if only she could apply herself. Actually, I think it was with Nikki.
Yep.
Like
I know that one.
So much potential. Mm-hmm. She's so smart if only she could apply herself. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, I'm not like, and the thing is, the more I know about nervous system regulation, it's like, between sensory processing issues and also safety issues, mm-hmm. once we don't feel safe, like all bets are off about our ability to process information.
Yeah, absolutely. And, add on top of that, ADHD means that your brain is low in dopamine. So you're kind of always going to be doing these dopamine seeking behaviors, which are not necessarily the thing that you're supposed to be doing in that moment.
Right.
Right. But at the same time, what I've found is if I just allow myself to do those things, whether it's, that can be having something with sugar in it, that can be going for a walk, that can be standing up and dancing around. If I allow myself to actually have space to be the weirdo, I actually can reach my potential.
Yes.
I can do the things.
Yes.
It's just when I'm forced into that neurotypical box that suddenly I'm highly ineffective.
Well, and the other day, on my Facebook page, we had a post on my Facebook page that was talking about the difference between how neurotypical people parse and process information, and it's a C word, and the way that, and not the see you next Tuesday word, but but I mean, for those of us who are neurodiverse, that might be, or neurodivergent, that may be how we would experience that word. And then there's this thing of like, it's kind of the idea of like functioning within the box versus functioning outside of the box.
Yeah.
And what this meme was saying, and I was like, oh my God, is that people with ADHD, and I think this is probably true for people with sensory processing disorders, people who are highly sensitive and empathic. And I think, there's just the more time I spend in this world, it's like spectrum disorders, whether it's being an empath, being on the autism spectrum, whether it's having, sensory processing disorder, being ADHD, I think they're all interconnected.
Yeah.
Because it's all about the way we pick up information in a different way than the average bear does. But so this meme was essentially saying that it is torture for somebody with ADHD to try to process information and fit in the box and do the thing. And in order for us, like, if you're going to do like a high ticket, like, you got to like go through and answer all the emails thing. If you're going to do like one of these kind of like productivity tasks, you absolutely need to counterbalance it with something that allows your creative brain to experience the world the way you're meant to, unbridled and able to see the 360 degree view. Because tunnel visioning into the singular prioritized task really takes, it's incredibly taxing.
It's super draining
on our brain.
It's super draining.
Super draining.
And one of my coaches, what she said at one point that just kind of made my head go, oh my God, that makes so much sense. She specifically, she's an ADHD coach, I suppose. She tends to work with a ton of ADHD people. Her name is Megan Kierstead. She's awesome. She said at one point that the scariest emotion for people with ADHD is boredom. And she said that, and I was like, yes, that makes so much sense. And it's the reason why, like, doing something like just going through emails, which for my husband, for example, is just like there's no emotional attachment to that for him. For me is like, I haven't even looked at my email in the 2 days that we've been here. Like, it's just
email. What email?
Why? I have so many unread emails. I don't really want to clear that out. That seems dumb.
Yeah. I
don't
mean,
care.
I what is it like? My name is Jennifer and I'm powerless over email.
Right.
I led a purge in my Facebook group earlier. We did a digital declutter and I was able to get my inbox down from 45,000 unopened emails.
Oh my God. You're more than me. Okay.
Oh yeah. 45,000 emails down to 16,000. And I actually emptied a couple email things. And I was so thrilled because what I've also noticed is that there's boredom, but then there's also the sensory processing issue of maxing out and overwhelming. And what happens for me is, I go straight to freeze. I don't go through fight or flight. I go right into freeze and my brain just goes and shuts down.
Yeah, no, there's actually, and this is where the spoons analogy kind of comes in as well. Like, it's like you just used up your last spoon and boop, we're done.
Cooked,
we're done.
Cooked, done.
And it's decision fatigue.
Right.
Ultimately.
Right.
And even if you've been making similar decisions all along, eventually it's just kind of like, I can't decide about this one more email. I have to be done.
Well, and I've discovered with email, if somebody sends me more, like I can probably handle answering like 3 questions, but I've noticed that like there's things like if somebody sends me a block of text with a bunch of information I have to parse out within that block of text, I cannot make sense of it.
Yep.
You need to break down in bullet points the pieces of information that you're asking from me. And if you give me like enough space between the tasks, then I can do it. But I actually was just approached by somebody to do an interview on their podcast and just seeing the requirements and the requests and the like, do this, jump through these hoops. Like I was just like, no, I'm not going to even bother being like, she made it way too hard. And she had one date available in her calendar for like a meet and greet. So I was just like, fuck that. I'm not even bothering with this. Like, lady, you be you, but I'm not going to do your thing. And that actually reminds me of another thing about, one of the things that can happen for us too is if it's not easy, if there's too many steps, it can really shut us down. And so like, for example, I've noticed if somebody wants to do something, but like, I'm like, hey, do you want to do this thing? And they're like, sure. When are you available? I am much more likely to shut down if there is like 2 or 3 back and forth about scheduling. I love scheduling links because I can shoot a calendar over to somebody and say, go schedule.
Yeah.
And it's done.
Yeah.
Whereas occasionally I'll get these people who are like in the in the stone age of like podcasting where they're like, when do you have time available? And I'll write back. And then it's like another day or two of emails back and forth of like, okay, let's settle on this. And I'm like, this does not have to be this way.
Yeah.
Because that takes so much bandwidth from my brain.
Yeah. I think, that's interesting. I hadn't actually thought of that, but like the number of times, especially because I'm an extrovert. And so I love being around people. Yeah. Like I'm a energy soaker. So I want to create those meetings. I want to go and do those things. But the second that it's too much, especially in text, too much back and forth, like I'm going to miss the date.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just going to go bloop and out there.
Yeah.
And I've definitely noticed like I haven't fully cracked it, but I've definitely noticed like there's certain things that if this call to action is really clear, I can respond to it very easily. Like there's a clarity, but if there's a vagueness about it, I will freeze. And that's the thing, even with like emails that I've noticed is that if somebody's asking for something and I don't quite understand it, or they're asking for too many pieces of information all at the same time, I am much more likely to be like, think an answer or try to sort out or percolate on the answer, but sort of leave it in the inbox and not deal with it because I do not know how to deal with it. And there's a saying, in marketing, a confused mind always says no. And I think that that is so true with people who are dealing with ADHD. And I would say also sort of the sensory processing issues. Like when you can't parse information easily, you're just going to shut down.
Well, and also, the ways that we are taking in this information is usually they're on our phones, it's on our computers. It's in spaces where there are so many other things to distract us. Usually that there's this additional layer of the confused mind because you're kind of like, well, I just read this other email and I need to go schedule this thing but I need to answer this. But in order to answer this, I need to go look at my phone. Oh my goodness, look at all the texts on my phone. And it's really hard nowadays as an ADHD person to block out some of that noise.
Yes, absolutely.
And on top of that, as someone with ADHD, you want the noise. Like the noise actually helps you get shit done. You just need to be allowed to flit around like a butterfly. Exactly.
And the thing is that depending on how you process and what your dominant sensory processing things are, it may be that you need, like, so for example, my husband definitely has, like, he doesn't necessarily have quite the same focusing issues that I have, but he is extremely, like, classically hyperactive. He's a drummer. He is tapping on everything nonstop. It's like he doesn't even know he's tapping. He is like Mr. Kinetic. Yeah. And what I noticed about him is that when he is working, and it blows my mind, he will be sitting, if we're in the same room together, he will be sitting on the couch with his laptop open. He will have his iPad next to him with a basketball game on. He will have his laptop on with a drumming video that he is editing with all the editing software up with the drumming video. He will have, and on top of that, there will be the television going with something completely different.
He sounds classically ADHD.
And he will, and then he will be like listening to, so there's the television is on, he's listening to something completely different, and he's got the basketball game going on in the background. And he thrives on this, and even in his office, he's got 3 monitors up, and there will be 3 different things going on. And he is able to, functions better that way.
Hopbacker.
I, on the other hand, get utterly distracted when there is too much, especially auditory information. Yeah. If there are too many auditory signals going on, like especially like I've noticed, I cannot tolerate 2 pieces of music going on simultaneously. I cannot handle that. Yeah. And even last night, as I was having a conversation with somebody, there were people who are playing music, but they were playing something that was very lyrical. And so it almost sounded like the music, even though there were no words, it was like somebody was singing. I was completely thrown off that I even lost I lost what I was saying because it was too much information was coming in.
Yeah. So I'm a musician. So one would assume that one of the things that would help me is like listening to music while doing something. Cannot.
No.
Absolutely cannot. I always I need something visual and auditory, but then it also needs something to do with my body.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And so at this point, I've actually gotten much better about not doing work in front of the television because that was a lot of back and forth that wasn't particularly helpful. But I have also recognized and given myself full permission to do small crafts like you've seen me embroidering, like listening to other people have a conversation or watching TV, unless something is truly particularly engaging, something else has to be going on.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes.
But what your husband does would be way too much for me.
Oh my God. I mean, I was like, dude, knock yourself out. Like, you do you, boo.
Yeah.
You know, but ironically, he is super light sensitive. I love light. I love having a lot of light, and I can parse a lot of visual stimulation.
Yeah.
He can tolerate noise at a level that just makes me completely banana whackers. But light is where he likes, so he's got, so the visual,
same with my husband.
So the visual field is where he kind of tends to shut down, and the auditory field is where I tend to shut down.
Yeah. And that's so interesting. Cause like thinking about it, my husband like never wants the lights on.
Yeah.
He only ever wants natural light if at all possible.
Mm-hmm.
Though there are times where visually things get way overwhelming for me. And it's usually if everything else is dark and there's just a light spot, like the television on. He always wants just the television and all the lights off. Oh my God, yes. And I'm like, I can't.
Yes, I cannot. It is so hard to tolerate when we are in a dark, like every so often he'll be like, could we please turn off all the lights and watch it like it's a movie? And I'm just really?
It's like I feel like it's just like forcing my attention to only do one thing, which I understand why he likes, but it's putting you into that neurotypical box again that like just doesn't quite fit.
Well, and another one is like, I don't know how you feel about like eating in dim lighting.
No, I hate it. I don't know why.
Eating in dim lighting. These like romantic restaurants where you can't even see your food.
Nope.
Oh my God, that drives me nuts.
No, it drives me insane. It drives, and you know, that's funny. That's something that I've only recently really started to register for myself as well. But yeah, it's kind of like I know where my fork is. I know where my plate is. For me, it doesn't even have to be that dark, but for some reason, I feel like I can't see it well enough.
Right.
I can see everything, but I can't see it well enough. No, I
need to be able to distinguish and identify what food am I putting in my mouth? What input am I going to be experiencing in a second?
Yeah.
I need to know what's
like
coming
a safety
in.
thing.
It is a safety thing. Well, and this kind of goes into sort of the cross diagnosis of sensory processing disorder.
Yeah.
You know, which in my travels, and, you know, as you were saying, I'm not a doctor, nor do it's like neither of us are doctors, nor do we play one on TV, but we have both spent quite a bit of time around a lot of people and a lot of experiences. But what I've noticed is like sensory processing disorder seems to be very common among empaths, very common among people, with ADHD, and very common for people with spectrum disorders.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating the way that, and I do really think it's like we are not experiencing we experience the world in such a vaster, broader way, which actually reminds me of something you were talking about earlier about the concept of this neurodiversity is actually was a boon. Like you were talking. Yeah.
So, and like this is more of a hypothesis at the moment, but something that I read is that researchers are thinking that ADHD might have been an evolutionary boon back when we were hunter-gatherers, because it was actually highly beneficial for us to be able to take in tons of information all the time. It meant that from far away, you could see the berries that were poisonous. Ooh, don't touch those, but those ones over there are good. It could mean that, you could spot a wild animal that would be food for your tribe from far away, as well as like actually be able to react quickly enough to pull out your bow and arrow and hit it, or whatever it is they were using at the time, and having, the thing that I always say about myself versus my husband is when the zombie apocalypse hits, I'm going to be the best one. I'm going to be the one that like everyone wants to go to in the emergency, because whenever an emergency happens, I am immediately able to take in the situation and assess really quickly what needs to happen. Whereas frequently, and I love him dearly, frequently when an emergency happens, he like freezes and tries to assess, but it takes too long.
Yes.
Everything takes too long.
Yes.
So that ability to take in far more information than is necessary on the day to day, and then also instinctively react quickly is incredibly helpful.
Yes.
Actually, at times. It's not really helpful when you're answering emails all day.
Exactly. I mean, it's sort of like we are wired for heightened experiences all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
And when things are normal, I mean, it's like that hypervigilance is still running in the background.
Yeah.
As like our screensaver or our operating system, it's constantly running. As you said that, I was just thinking, I wonder how many people working in emergent fields, like working like firefighters, cops, and emergency room workers and surgeons, but like how many people in sort of the fields of first responders are ADHD.
So
it would be,
I don't know those numbers necessarily, but I did read at one point so I was diagnosed back in high school. I ended up going off medication for college and for about a decade plus afterwards. And then after I had my first kiddo, I started realizing that I was having a hard time again. And so I started diving back in about 3 years ago to everything. And so I was searching around looking for information on ADHD, which is so much more than there was back
how much
then.
More information there is.
And I actually found a list of like really great professions for people with ADHD, because this like quick responding, enjoying sort of being in the action thing. Yes, firefighters, policemen, first responders, lots of doctors have ADHD. Yeah. But also artists, creatives highly tend to have at least ADHD tendencies. And it is just that ability, and especially for me on stage, it's been hugely helpful for when, a set piece doesn't make it on stage. Okay, I'm continuing. And I'm continuing without worrying about it because I've already thought through.
You've prepared,
all of the things that could happen.
Yes.
And I think even without being a first responder, I don't know if you do this, but I know all of the ways that I would get my children out of the house in case of a fire, because I lay in bed at night. Yes.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I just assumed, that's funny. I just assumed that this was hypervigilance from childhood when we did like fire drills all the frickin' time as kids. And we were constantly being like, I was terrified. I came into this life with an absolute terror of house fires.
Yeah.
I believe it is because I have been burned at the stake multiple times in other lives.
Sure.
And so I came in with a little bit of anxiety about getting burned again. But I just remember that is one of like, where is the nearest escape route? What is the most effective way that I can handle this? Yeah. Preparing for the zombie apocalypse sure.
And, along with ADHD very much comes comorbidities like anxiety, like depression, like hypervigilance, these things that they're just, if you're going through the world with ADHD, you're going to end up anxious at some point, Yes. But I also think that part of it is sometimes just, laying in bed at night, if you're not quite tired enough, but you're trying to get yourself to go to sleep, what a fantastic boredom moment. So your brain's going to throw up. Like, oh, well, let's be proactive and let's plan for all the worst case scenarios in your life.
I'm really lucky in that at some point my brain decided, like, without even my consent, my brain started doing this thing where I go to sleep thinking of art projects.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And so I will go to sleep just kind of visualizing or daydreaming or imagining things and kind of planning for something goal oriented, which is way better than when I was a child and I was like worrying about the boogeyman and the ghosts under my bed and about the fire that was going to hit and all of the other things. I just got to say, like, it is like, just start thinking about a project and start parsing it out.
Yeah.
You'll fall, at least for me, I fall asleep. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like I just keep on going and going and going.
No, there was definitely a point where I realized I had to very actively choose what I was thinking about, because just to share with you and your readers, listeners. Yeah. Yeah. I honestly am still scared of the dark. The entire time, Jen and I are on a writing retreat together right now, and I'm sleeping in the attic. I've had a light on up there.
Oh, of course.
Whole time.
Of course.
Whole time. Because I just because if I don't, then I can't see things. And if I can't see things, I don't know what's there. And if I don't know what's there, then that's what my brain's going to focus on.
Exactly.
Is what could be there.
Totally.
You know? And I'm in an attic. There's
You're
totally
in an
ghosts.
attic. There are ghosts up there.
But I don't want you to go check.
Well,
actually.
and I mean, the ghost almost took my toiletries kit.
That's true.
Just saying.
That's true. Yeah.
Ghost, ADHD. Not really sure what we're talking about.
It's both. We'll blame the ghosts.
Both. It's the ghosts.
Yes.
Ghosts are very helpful. Ghosts are very useful for all of
clean.
this.
They like to clean themselves, which is why they took your toiletries.
They took my toiletries because they like to clean themselves.
Yes,
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Totally makes sense. Oh my goodness, Katie, this has been such a I mean, I just feel like we just like this particular interview conversation really has just gone so rapidly.
Yeah. This was fun.
This was really
fun.
This was, I mean, I just think, I hope that as we've had this conversation, as you're listening to this, that for anybody who's been struggling, anybody who's been like, why can't I? Like, that you're like, oh my God, you mean like there are other people like this? Other people struggle with the same thing?
I would highly suggest, if this is resonating, like, go look up the current symptoms of ADHD, because they're probably not exactly what you have in your mind.
Yes.
It's much broader now than I can't sit still, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to make a comment, talking about, I was actually thinking about, as you're talking about, one of the things for us is like both the sort of the blessing and the curse of our sensitivity to many things and the fact that we're always taking things in. I actually think that one of the reasons why ADHD is becoming more and more, quote, problematic, unquote, for us as a society is because in the last 20 years, we have gone from information coming at a pace that we could manage it to information coming at a pace that we cannot manage it anymore. I grew up, I was born in the early 60s. And so I was born into the analog age. I was born into the point where the only way you could listen to music was if you took a piece of vinyl, put it on the stereo, and you could listen to a 30, one side was 15-minute record, the other side 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And you had to turn it over and you had to process it and you had to do this. TV was scheduled. You could only watch a program at a specific time. Mail took upwards of a week to get to you from one person to another. The phone would ring. There was no answering machine. There was no such thing as text messages. There was no such thing as email.
Yeah.
There was no instant information. And the news was only coming on at the morning, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, and then 1 hour at the late night news. So there was 3 hours of the day where you were getting exposed to the information, or you would get the newspaper and you could process it at your leisure. But the newspaper was coming each day on a piece of paper and you had this concrete physical thing to hold. And now we are being barraged and bombarded with information 24/7. Our phones are on, our devices are on, we are hearing things, and it's just nonstop. And I think that's the other thing that's making this almost like epidemic.
Yeah.
because it's too much.
I feel like this could be an entire other episode.
Absolutely.
But remember how I said that boredom was the scariest emotion?
Yes.
When the brain doesn't get to be bored, it stops being creative. It doesn't have space for creativity to build that. And so kind of where my head is going right now is I wonder if there are people who are having the symptoms of ADHD because they were never taught how to be bored, as opposed to someone with ADHD who it can't be bored, basically, for whom that's like actually a really terrifying thing. You know?
And I find it's interesting. You were saying it's terrifying. I actually experience boredom as melancholy and blueness.
Yeah.
Like I start sinking into these feelings of like, if there is too much quiet and too much stillness, I start feeling like the well of sadness that is on the planet.
Yes.
And so that's another, as an empath, I think that's another reason why we tend to seek stimulation, is so that there's sort of like a radio, like there's, we've got some company.
Ooh.
Yeah. So that we're not receiving, like, because, and that I actually think is another piece of just our whole society, like, plug in air fresheners and all of these things where we're constantly creating some kind of sensory input that also helps, that almost helps us to entrain so that we're not picking up on too
that's
much
so
information.
interesting. That's such an interesting way of thinking about that. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's actually how I experience boredom as well. I've just, I just thought that the melancholy part was me being weird, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
No.
How interesting.
No. It's
I want to talk to you more about that.
Yeah. Katie, we are at the top of the hour.
Yes.
This conversation has been like off the charts amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
Oh my God. Yeah. So good.
Let's do it again.
Yes, let's do it again. So Katie, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can head to my website, keepingitrealkatie.com. They can follow me on Instagram at keepingitrealkatie. Facebook.
With a K, you guys.
Oh, yes, with a K. With a K. I'm also on TikTok with that same handle. Facebook. I'm all the places.
You're all the places.
I'm all the places.
And you guys don't have to worry about this because all you have to do is go over to empathicmasteryshow.com and the show notes will be there with all the links.
Magic of technology.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.